Well, joining us now on episode number 3 of Play by Play with Dan Dunleavy is Dave Reid. And for those that in Buffalo or Western New York that don't know a lot about Dave's background, there is a lot to it. You can go back to the Ontario Hockey League and his roots there and being drafted into the NHL. And those stories we will eventually get to. But certainly in the brief time we have, Dave, I thought it would be appropriate. First of all, thanks for joining us. But find out how it is that a Stanley Cup winner, an NHL player, finds that moment in his career, in his journey where he says, hey, the broadcast side of things, which at one point you might not have really warmed up to, I don't know, you all of a sudden decide this is a route that might be a good one for me to stay involved in the game. How did that all happen with you?
Well, first, Dan, thanks for having me. This is lots of fun. It's great to be able to talk hockey once again. We haven't done much of that lately in the last few months, at least. Hopefully we have more coming. But I got into the broadcast business. Everything just worked out extremely well, timing-wise, for myself. It was funny when I was finishing up in Colorado in 2001. We kind of had a running joke with the team when we had Hall of Famers on that team with Sakic, Forsberg, Blake. We had Ray Bork, Patrick Waugh. Adam Foote should be in the Hall of Fame. Chris Drury, we had some fantastic players, and you guys would know Chris extremely well when he was with the Sabres. And it seemed that when we lost a game, especially come playoff time, the guys who spoke to the team weren't those guys, or spoke to the media weren't those guys. It was the Sean Podines and the Dave Reids and the Stefan Yells and the John Clems and the Greg DeVrieses, excuse me. It was more of the lesser light guys, not the guys you would see on the power play. And then when it just seemed that on a regular occurrence, we got into that situation, and with having some deep playoff runs in the last 5 years of my career, those regularities came in more often when they were looking for not just your generic comments. And honestly, when you look around, and you've seen it as much as I have, guys don't like to necessarily sit and discuss losses. They'll talk wins and talk about how great they were, but when you want to get into discussing what's wrong with the team, you find that role player on a team who wants to sit and discuss hockey and talk about some of the problems that are easily fixable that the fans can maybe relate to and get a little more in-depth conversation. So I found myself being kind of that guy many times. And then from there, I went to, I'm going to try to shut these sounds off here.
Oh, you're fine.
It won't be disturbing. So from there, when I retired in 2001, it was interesting. I finished up with 961 games. So I was half the season away from 1,000. We just won the Cup in 2001 with Colorado. It was my second in 3 years. And I was like, hey, if I can get 1,000 games for a player in my situation, a guy who'd been around 17 years pro, and it might be something that would work out, really cool, be a really cool thing. But the NHL Network was starting at the same time. And I lived just north of Toronto. The NHL Network was going on in Toronto with TSN. I was one of the partners and broadcasting there. My agent was good friends with Bob McKenzie, Rick Curran's my agent. He says, we'll set you up, see if we can get you an interview there and, see what's going on. And while you're waiting to see if you could maybe get a job. So I went down, did an audition. I did it with Vic Router, and we sat at a desk like the NHL Network, and it was like, we're going to show you some games. All you need to do is talk about them. And I was watching the games. I'm like, wow, I remember these games. So we did that. And I said, I'm waiting. And this was like October of 2001. I said, I'm waiting to see if I get another job. I'd like to finish up with one more year and see how it goes. Right. Okay, no problem. Well, the job never came about. I had a couple offers, but nothing worked out well. Or well enough for me to say, absolutely, I want to do it. And then I called TSN, who was organizing the NHL Network, and I said, hey, just wondering, what's going on? I know you guys have started. How did the audition go? I haven't heard. And they're like, well, we've been waiting to hear from you. When do you want to start? So that's really how I got the job. It was just fortunate timing. And again, they were happy to have me because I was a local guy living just north of Toronto. So I could easily pop in regularly. We did regular shows. It was, it's hockey all night long, and they didn't have a lot of guys. I mean, we had Gary Green, Pierre Maguire, Mike Keenan was in between jobs, myself. We only Jay Onright was our only host at the time, and I mean Dave Hodge popped in the odd time, and so we were really limited with, or they were limited, and it was really much just let's get this thing going from the ground up. And a lot of the producers, directors, everybody involved were all young guys just starting in the business. We had a trailer out in the parking lot, which was our production office that we'd meet in. And that's because it was literally, let's just get this going. So that's how my career started. And I got involved when TSN just signed a 5-year deal with the National Hockey League in November of 2001. It was going to kick in the next year. So it was one of these perfect timing. And I had won 2 cups. I was still very current with the game. I had a pretty good knowledge of the game, and as far as, kind of like the strategies of the game. I mean, that's why I lasted so long, because I could understand where the game was going and how to execute plays and that type of thing. I wasn't just get out there and rely on all skill to play the game. Where some guys, you talk to them about the game, and some of the best players I know are not good analytics guys or coaches guys, because they can't break things down. They just, hey, I just do it because that's what I do, and you're extremely good at it. And other guys, like the Dave Tippett's of the world, are fantastic coaches who were the grinders of the game. So I kind of fit in more in that category, and I could, I suppose I was able to put a few sentences together. Sometimes people will say I put too many sentences together, and I was able to chit chat and talk hockey. So that's how I started. And then from there, TSN said, hey, you are going to have more live television in a month than most of these guys who work on news and TV get in a year, because you're sitting doing 5 and 6 hours of live TV a night, 4 to 5 nights a week. And that's kind of where we got going. And then TSN slowly brought me in to do color commentating on games, got into studio shows, and eventually it just all went from there. So that was the beginning of my career in broadcasting. And every time, like any other broadcaster, someone says, hey, you want to do this, you want to do some color in a game? Hey, absolutely, I'll do it. And then the next year, TSN wanted to start the season off. So this would have been the 02-03 season. They wanted to start the season off with a bang. This was kind of I believe it was the first of their 5-year deal. So they sent myself and Vic Router out, who Vic doesn't call hockey games. There'd be no Vic in Canada. Vic is a curling guy. Everybody knows Vic from curling in Canada. And so they sent Vic and I out to do a game in like Minnesota. And they were doing games from all over the place. And they wanted to bring them all in on all their feeds and have a presence at all these games. So Vic and I, that was my first color game. So it was kind of, it was just one of those things. It's like, let's get going. And I was still very fresh in everybody's mind from winning cups, and had a bunch of stories to tell. So that's how I started.
Dave Reid joining us with TSN, NHL Network, and the Stanley Cup winners he's mentioned. For those in Western New York and elsewhere around the world who watch this on the web, Dave couldn't have come up with a better man to work with as far as, first of all, your audition tape than Vic Router, because he's just amazing at what he does. Very easy to work with. He's a pro, smooth as they come. You mentioned curling, also known for CFL calls, and really soccer. He can do anything. So great for you that you wound up in the lap of Vic Router, because the image might not suit it, but it certainly was the right guy to land beside. I know that for fact. When you start getting into the color commentary side of things, the question I always have for former players, and I think it's a legitimate one, is what was the battle like for you when it came time to be honest and open about a play gone wrong? Because you can honestly think back to your career. I know in my career calling games, I can think back to moments that went wrong for me. And then I try to act like I can do no wrong in the next game. So how hard or easy was that for you separating, because you say you were still close to the game and the players? What was that transition like to you when it came time to be honest about, hey, that was the wrong play to make right there?
It's a great question. I think that's something that a lot of people ask. It's how do you tell everybody that guy really screwed up without lambasting him? And I was always, I made plenty of errors. You start talking about bringing up errors. The first thing that popped in my head, I remember throwing a pizza across the ice to Brett Hull. when we were playing. I was at the Leafs in Maple Leaf Gardens, and I have no idea why I'm even throwing this pass. Brett Hull picks it off and walks in and just buries it. And I'm just like, I didn't get a lot of ice time at that time as it was. Those are the mistakes I'm thinking. So as you're asking me this question, I'm thinking, could be Harry Neal could have been doing that game in Hockey Night in Canada for all I know on a Saturday night in Toronto. I'm thinking, what did they comment about my pass from tape to Brett Hull? So, but I always look at it as there are mistakes are why the games are fun. If there were no mistakes, the game would be awful boring. So everybody makes mistakes, and I don't think and everybody knows they made the mistake. And when I made that pass, I knew, boy, that was a stupid thing to do. And yeah, I heard it from the coach, but I don't need to be told what an idiot I am. I can't believe this guy plays in the National Hockey League. How can a guy make that play? So I was, I look at it and say, I'll just tell it like it is. And, a lot of times there are ways to say it for a veteran guy, like he knows better. That's a play that he knows better at this point of the game, that you shouldn't be throwing that pass up the middle. Just keep it safe, throw it up the boards. That's a great way, in my opinion, and that's kind of the way I always looked at it. How do you say it that the player would get the point if you were talking to the player? He would get the point and not feel that, boy, you just blasted him. But you say that in the public and the fans are watching the game, they know right away, ooh, yeah, that's a bad one. And there are other guys who would be very happy to, chastise the guy differently. But I never felt it was appropriate to, rip a player. And then when I do a lot of World Hockey or junior, with TSN, from World Juniors to U18s to all sorts of different things with the younger kids. And I really found that helped me a lot to critically analyze a situation. And that's kind of how TSN got me started with a lot of things. When I would do a World Under 17 challenge, we did CIS championships, and it really kind of got me into the point where I don't need to really rip this young kid. He's a teenager. Like, why really rip him? And you can politely say that was a bad mistake in a very nice way, where the player, if he listened, would go, that's fair. Yeah, that's fair. So that's kind of how I did it. And then you get down in the locker room, and I've been in locker rooms, and I'm sure you've been in locker rooms, when that broadcaster came in as a player I'm talking about in the locker room, and that broadcaster would come in, and I've seen guys step up and just rip the guy and say, don't even think of coming in this room. You're going to talk about me like that, or this guy like that. And I've seen guys step up for teammates and just blast one of the color guys on national broadcast coming in the locker room and telling, a few expletives in there. Yeah. But that kind of also reminded me, it's like, all right, I'm going to have to go and ask this guy possibly a question. And I might be asking the question, what were your thoughts on that play? So that's kind of how I did it. And it always seemed to work out well. Now, I have had producers who want me to be a little more, a little more of the zinging and the ripping. Mm-hmm. But I've always said that's not me as a person. I didn't do that when I played. And I'm, I always think of the Buffalo Sabres. You got a guy like Matthew Barnaby. Now, there's a guy who I think if you had him calling a game, you might see him throw a few more zingers in there. Because on the ice, he would be the guy throwing zingers at you, right? So on the ice, I wouldn't say a lot. So I kind of try to transition that into my broadcasting and without, you want to be emotional without going over the top. But there are everybody in broadcasting, you've seen, there are a lot of guys, especially behind the scenes producers, like, oh, come on, you got to say that. You'll say something with your when you're holding the button down. It's like, I can't believe that guy. I know that player, blah, blah, blah. And you'll be like, you got to say that on air. I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying that on air. I'll figure out something else to say.
We have both RJ and I have the pleasure of working alongside Rob Ray right now. So pretty much anything he says, there's not too many people that are challenging, but they'll have fun. Ray, and the thing is, and I think you get the idea too, and it's interesting you talk about guys that when they played who didn't want to talk necessarily to the media. And listen, I get it. I've heard every question asked over and over again. For the life of me, I don't know why anyone interviews a goaltender who lost a hockey game and asks, did you want that shot back again? I mean, of course he did. Everybody in front of him wanted that shift back again. But the one thing I do find is that the guys that did, and you mentioned this earlier, the guys that really had to keep earning every single game to prove why they're there. Now, you knew why you're in the NHL. Rob knew why he was in the NHL. but it was almost as if every night, like you say, you're not a Patrick Roy, you're not Guy Lafleur. So every night you're kind of going out saying, hey, I deserve to be here with these guys and for these reasons. And it's those players that I found too coming up in the young stages of my broadcast career that were the players that quite honestly would talk more about the game with me than a Brett Hull or anyone else. You wanted a colorful comment, you could go to Brett Hull and get a very colorful comment and quite funny at times too. But you wanted to learn about the game, you would talk to Dave Reid. You would talk to, for me in Toronto covering the team, you'd talk to guys like a Todd Gill, a Gary Volk, guys like that were, hey, I'm not Matt Sundin. I don't need to escape from 30 guys. Sit down. Let's talk for 15, 20 minutes, half an hour about the game. So I certainly get that. Dave Reid is with us, and I want to fast forward, Dave, to 1999, and it's a great season for you and certainly a really good playoff for the Dallas Stars. People in Buffalo now don't want to hear it, but the reason why I wanted you on was because there's always another side to the story, and quite often it's a story that people don't hear enough about. And even today, in doing my research for this chat with you, I didn't realize how much of a role a Dallas heavy metal band by the name of Pantera played in a Game 6 overtime against the St. Louis Blues. I don't know how tied in you were to that story. I know Craig Ludwig really was the catalyst with that one, but so many things went into that season. But I am going to fast forward to the playoffs and that St. Louis Blues series. If we could start there, what was it about that series that maybe convinced your group in '99 that you were onto something here?
Yeah, I think we struggled every year the years previously with Edmonton in the first round, and getting through Edmonton. We were in 4. We were on a very big high, and St. Louis had they were kind of up and coming. They were pushing, but we had all sorts of confidence going into that series. I think out of anything, that was probably the series we had the most confidence in. Just because Edmonton, we had lost 2 years earlier in the first round in 7, and we always battled them. And the St. Louis coming against St. Louis, I recall just the confidence that we had in that series, and top to bottom, with whether it was goaltending, power plays, 5-on-5. We were a very tough team to play against. It was very grinded out. And our confidence level was extremely high in that series. And I think that was the series, I think, when Zuby coughed one up. If I might be wrong, I think it was Turgeon scored the overtime goal against us. And I remember Hitch wasn't very happy. And I think it was Bob Gainey in a meeting. And Craig Button tells the story better than I do. Says, well, Hitch is going off. And I think it was Bob Gainey in the meeting after the game said, well, he said, just remember that, Hitch, because you're never going to see that again. And it's like, turn the page, let's move on. And that was Zuby, because Zuby was so smooth. Sergei Zubov never made a mistake. He's in the Hall of Fame. I think he should have been in years ago, but he never made that mistake. And he coughed one up the middle in that game, and in overtime. And it was like, Hitch, as the way most coaches and Hitch could be, is ballistic after a game, couldn't believe it. And Bob's like, hey, let's move on. And that's from Bob's experience. But we just had a lot of confidence in that series, in probably more so in that series than in any series in that year.
So that series gets wrapped up, and I'll finish the quick Pantera stories because we've got a lot of music fans in Western New York. They came up with a song. Craig Ludwig he said to them, I understand, the band, he's buddies with Vinnie Paul, the drummer, said, listen, I'm getting kind of bored.
I believe, let me see if I can remember right. The cup, I'm pretty sure ended up at their house that night.
Yeah, I can imagine. So
I'm just trying to, I can't remember everything, but that was one of the crazier nights.
So, yeah, they write a theme song for you, and they want it there before Game 6 against the Blues to get the guys all riled up. And you'd won, I think, a number of games in a row with that song playing in the locker room at some point or whatever it is. And it didn't arrive until you went into just before overtime, I guess, of Game 6. To put the song on, I remember Craig Ludwig in the interview saying, well, we asked Eddie Belfour if he'd mind if we put this song on, because I guess you don't want to get in your goaltender's head
any
different way. And Eddie said, go ahead, crank it, and you go out and you win. You get the overtime winner. I mean, it's funny. These
Yeah, it's good. You know,
things.
it's funny. It's funny how everybody, because Craig was very in tune with that. I don't recall the. I mean, I was so focused on doing what I need to do. I don't recall that. I mean, Craig was, you know, he was, you know, he was Mr. Dallas type thing. He was social. He was right in tune with all that stuff.
Yeah.
His recollection of that is definitely bang on. I remember Pantera. I don't recall. I mean, I can't recall the name of the song. It was a long time ago. Yeah. But
it's something
no question that was huge. That was a big part of it, was the music in the locker room and the music. You know, like, it wasn't necessarily when I started there. I can remember going to Dallas and listening to the music in the locker room, going, "Oh my, like, this is. I don't know if I'm going to last here." The guys were younger who were playing the music, but Metallica and Pantera, I think, ended up being the two that I recall the most. Listening to the music throughout the years in Dallas.
You go on.
We'd finish with that. Was the end of my career in Dallas. Was in '99 as well, and I do remember Pantera going partying at their place in Dallas. I believe their hot tub was in the shape of the pool was in the shape of a Crown Royal bottle, and the hot tub was the cap. For those of you that remember the Crown Royal bottles.
Well,
so that's my Pantera story.
Well,
Letty's got a little different one, but you know, that was. Yeah.
It's probably best we don't tell anymore because they're not for now. Moving on to Colorado, and a team that you become very familiar with later in your career, as you already mentioned. But you know, you get to a point in the series where you've lost the game. You gave up 7 goals, and you needed to win the next couple of games. After that 7-5 loss, I know you've talked about it before, but I've got to think you talked about the confidence from Edmonton. The turnaround immediately after that loss to Colorado really seems to me like it would have been a very obvious springboard to, hey, at some point we're going to have our backs to the wall, and we have them to the wall now, and now we say no. And it's kind of, that's what you did, because you then took over the next 2 games in that series to move on.
Yeah, that series was. I still look back at that series as being one of the most incredible 7-game series I ever played, and it was the conference final. And the Avs were, you know, it was the Avs and the Red Wings, and we were kind of the new guys coming in. You know, we'd been pushing. We'd won President's Trophy, and it was still the Avs. They still had the swagger. You know, they had the confidence. They had that careless style that we can just outscore you, and we're going to do what we want. We've got Patrick and Net, and we'll do whatever we want. And they could skate, they could match us. You know, when we wanted to shut it down, their skill level could get through us. And they were very imposing. And not only the style of play, but they had Hall of Famers, you know, much like we did. But you never look at your own team as thinking we're all, you know, we've got Hall of Famers, and we had as many as they did. You look at your opposition and go, wow, how are we going to stop these guys? Sakic and Forsberg, and they had Ozelinch there. They had Deadmarsh was flying, and that was the challenge. And then they had Patrick and Net. So I think that was where our coaching stepped up with Hitch, and he stepped up with the game plan and got us to believe, and this is what we need to do. This is who we are, and we need to stick to this. And our veteran leadership, guys like Guy Carbonneau and Craig Ludwig, stepped up. The guys who had won cups, Joe Nieuwendyk, had won a cup in Calgary. Sean Chambers was kind of a quiet leader back there. And, you know, we had great players, but they hadn't won. Like Mike Modano hadn't won. Hully hadn't won. Yuri Letton was a great player, a quiet guy. Even Darian Hatcher on the back end. We had Zuby and Daryl Sador. But Zuby had won, but he didn't, you know, he was, again, another quiet leader. But that's where our leaders really stepped up. And that's where guys like Guy Carbonneau, and we had Mike Keane and Brian Screw and other guys who had won, were huge for our team at that point to keep our focus, to believe in ourselves. And that's where the veteran leadership, I always say, teams, it's so difficult to win if you don't have that group of guys that's been there, done that can reel it in at times. And that's where we were able to kind of reel ourselves in. And you know, even as we moved along against the Sabres, there were many of those times that it was our veteran leadership of players who had won before, who, you know, we didn't necessarily, you don't rely on those guys to score you goals, but you rely on those guys to keep the level of you know, that roller coaster ride, that level of calmness throughout your locker room. And we knew we had the talent. it was just a matter of making sure that we knew we had the talent, and play that way. You've seen many teams that, wow, this is a very talented team, but if they don't believe in themselves and believe in their system, that talented team isn't going to be successful. And that's where the coaching and our leadership really stepped up through that series. That was both arenas were small and old. That was old McNichol Arena in Denver, and it was the Reunion Arena in Dallas. So the arenas were small and older. They were loud. The games were just back and forth, and they were physical games. They were skill games. They were nasty games. But that was you talk about having the will throughout a series. That was one of those series where you had to rely on everything, whether it's your veteran leadership, your coaching, your goaltending, your power play, your scorers, from both sides. That was, I always look back to that was probably the one series that I can remember going, when we got through that, it was like, oh my gosh, like we kind of, in my mind, I don't know if other guys thought it, but it was like we slayed the dragon, because the Avs were, I think everybody expected the Avs to beat us, and we were the underdog in that. And there weren't many series that we weren't, that we were the underdog. But in that one, I think most people, even though we were President's Trophy winners, I think most people felt that we were the underdog.
Well, Dave's being very humble here, because he and his line mates played a huge role in that series, particularly not only throughout the entire playoffs, but particularly against the Colorado Avalanche. And as we fast forward one more time to that final against the Buffalo Sabres, it's interesting turns in the series here that, obviously both teams at some point, when you get to this stage of the playoffs, you're banged up. Then you're going to suffer even more injuries during the series. And as you go back to that final against the Sabres, Buffalo comes into your building first. You've talked about the mindset of your team, but as I've asked many of our guests to this point who've come up to the Sabres in the playoffs, what was your thought about, as you look across the red line at center, about facing that group of Buffalo players, and with Dominic Hasek that you had to beat?
Stop Jason Woolley. Game one. Pretty sure it was Woolley who scored from the blue line in game one in overtime. Yeah. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. No, our mindset in that was, we're facing a team that's just like us. They didn't have, and we knew they didn't have the Madanos. They didn't have a game breaker like a Hull or a Madano who were already superstars and Hall of Famers to be. And we had more guys as well, but those are the two guys that come to my mind. We knew that we felt our goaltending was as good, if not better, than any goaltender in the game. So you had Belfour against Hasek, so that was kind of a wash. But we also knew that the Sabres were an extremely disciplined team and played like we did. They wanted to play the outside game. They wanted to play it, chip it behind to open ice, go get it. Chip it behind the next guy, chip it below the goal line, no back passes, no risky passes to the middle. Make you come and get the puck from me. It's my puck. You've got to come and get it from me. They didn't give the puck away, and they back check like hounds. And that was our style. It was back pressure, back check, get the puck deep, pressure the D behind the goal line, force them to make mistakes. And their D played a lot like ours. Even though I still say, even though I felt we had more skill up front, our D were quite comfortable to get and chip it off the glass and get it out. And our forwards were quite comfortable to chase it down. Mike Modano, who loved to pick up the puck behind his own net, and like few players who ever played the game, could go end to end with the shirt flapping, and he didn't have a helmet, the hair blowing in the wind, but he was quite comfortable with chip it and chase it. Brett Hull, chip it and chase it. And that's what I remember about that series in Buffalo. This is the game plan. They're a mirror image of our style of play. And it's not going to be, we definitely went into that series because we had gone 7, and I can't remember if Buffalo went, it was 6 or 7. I think they came out of playing Toronto, I believe it was, that they had come through. Again, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But we felt that, hey, we got this. We're going to win this. And game 1 was a very, very rude awakening for our team, because we knew, we were being told everything about the Sabres, but we're like, you know what? Yeah, but we just beat the Avs. I mean, come on, seriously, we just beat Colorado. And that was the feeling I got from our group. And we had a swagger and a confidence and a cockiness about us. And that quickly got humbled in game one when we lost in overtime. And it was like, oh boy, we're in for a series. And I don't know if there were more than 4 goals scored in any of the remainder of those games. Everything was 2-1, 3-1. I mean, it was a crazy series. But coming into the series, it was like this was what we're going to face. It was pretty much our team, but and I don't think I'm wrong by saying probably they didn't have the high level skill and scoring skill, but they had a work ethic like as good as ours. And we felt that was our motto, was our team was we're going to outwork everybody.
Yeah, we had a chance on a Zoom meeting, weekly session that we have. And this week we had Ralph Kruger, the current coach of the Sabres, on, and Miro Shatan, who obviously was from the 99 group of players, the talented goal scorer that they were looking forward to getting some help from. And he suffered an injury in the playoffs and came back in the series against Toronto and tries to be a difference maker against your Dallas Stars. And I bring that up, the bumps and bruises, because you look to that final series and you guys had a couple of scares in games 2 and 3 with Mike Modano and Brett Hull at one point being knocked out of each of those hockey games. And I can't imagine what it was like going back in the room. As you say, you had a deep team, but you got Brett Hull for a reason. And obviously Mike Modano, you take him out of the lineup, you might be looking around the room, not doubting yourself, but wondering where that magic moment's going to come from.
Yeah, because those were 2 players that didn't need a lot of ice and need one play to break a game open.
Yeah.
And when they weren't there, and this is where unsung heroes come up. We had Tony Herkus, and these were the days, the good old days of hockey. I like to say, what your rosters were extremely deep. There was no salary cap, and so we had players on top of players. So Tony Herkus stepped right into Mike Modano's shoes on that line. Now, I'm not saying that he is Mike Modano, and I know Herc will say that he's not Mike Modano, but he was that skill player that didn't play third, fourth line. He was a skill player who played top power play, and he had the skill, and he had the mind process to play with Hull and Lettinen. But still, we knew that Mo was hurt, and we knew that Hully was hurt. And I think going back to game 7, if we had come back to game 7, we probably could have used about 2 more days to get those guys through. I remember in game 6, Mike, in the triple overtime, Mike was coming and getting IV, and I'm sure some of the Sabres were probably the same, but Mike was exhausted and Hully had the bad knee. He was pretty much skating on one leg out there. Now he wasn't the fastest guy. His game was more playing the smart game, but still he had the battle. I mean, every shift you had, I think both teams probably felt the same. You had somebody on your back, and it was almost like a 5-on-5 unit in both ends and everywhere you went on the ice. So it was very, very demanding physically. And you guys, the Sabres lost Rhett Warner to a broken leg, and he was on the back end. He was a player that, much like our guys, like the Matt Tkachuks or the Hatchers, who really made it difficult to play against. And so there were definitely some serious injuries on both teams. We were just fortunate enough that our guys were still able to, keep going at a pace where they were able to contribute.
So what were you putting in your body going into the third overtime?
Yeah. I was just a water guy. I was never one of these guys. I was never that pink milkshake with all the proteins and stuff afterwards. I would drink, it was strictly water. And I hated the taste of Gatorade. I probably shouldn't say that because there's sponsors everywhere. But I love Gatorade, but when I played, I hated the sugary. I hated any taste of a drink. So it was strictly water. It was coffee before the game and water during the game, and then beer after the game. That was pretty much old school. That most of our team was like that. But I was strictly water. And it was interesting. I talked about the leadership earlier with guys like Guy Carbonneau and Mike Keane. And on that rotation, I had been Benoit Hogue, I believe, towards ACL earlier in the playoffs, and he missed most of the third round against Colorado. So I stepped up on the line with Nieuwendyk and Jamie Langenbrunner. And in the final series against the Sabres, Benny came back to play, and Hitch was rotating kind of me and Benny between Newey's line and Carbo's line. And Guy Carbonneau played with Mike Keane and myself, and that was kind of in the third. We also had Pat Verbeek in that third, fourth line area. And Carbonneau and Keane and Modano, Lettinen, Hull, Nieuwendyk, Langenbrunner, these guys were on the pretty much a 3-line rotation. We were going through game 6 and triple overtime. It was difficult. We played 4 lines, but those 3 lines were the go-to 3 lines. And me and Benny were swapping out. So we weren't going every third shift. We were kind of in that rotation. So it'd be like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 as we moved along. And me and Benny would be popping out. And I was like, thank goodness, because I don't know how these guys, and I look at guys like Carbo and they 20, 30 seconds, and it was a go, 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 push, push, push. And when you're in the moment, you're going through it. I remember sitting in the locker room, and Mo's got he's in the trainer room getting IV'd up with fluids, and everybody's sitting with ice bags on, and they're trying to find as much food as possible. We've run out of all of our bars, all of our munchies. They're bringing pizza, they're bringing in hot dogs, they're just bringing in anything that they can find from anywhere, just because guys were getting, were hungry. And the guys in the locker room who were the most focused, I can always recall, were Keane, Carbonell, Ludwig, Screwland. They were the guys. Screwy would keep you loose. He was just a jokester. There'd be something going on, and Screwy would come up with something to like, hey, relax, guys. It's just another game type of thing. It's like, no, it's not. It's not another game. But those were the guys that really, in my mind, kind of got us through heavy moments. And there was nothing heavier than a game 6 when you got a chance of winning the cup and you're going into triple overtime and in a grind series like that. But I was fortunate. I probably had more energy because I wasn't getting pushed, but I also realized that if I was in that rotation, I don't know if I could have kept that pace up through that time with all the emotions and everything that was going through my body. And I think Hitch realized that, and he was able to get certain guys in certain situations he needed.
I always wonder who the guys on the bench, Brett scores the goal to win the cup, who are the guys that were looking down, taking a drink out of a bottle, just glancing up for a half a second in the crowd just to get a new feeling, to get life in your legs. But obviously, you've been asked this so many times, but you're exhausted and you've just accomplished the ultimate feat in that moment. What did you do once that puck crossed the line and you saw Brett jumping up and down?
It was. I just went get over the board as fast as possible, but we all couldn't. First of all, we're exhausted, and when you're trying to get over. We did get over, but it was like, you're okay. You go, I'll go. You go. It's not as though you're just jumping over, and hopping over, because you literally the bench wasn't big enough, and you just couldn't do it. We just couldn't get out fast enough. But that's what I remember. I remember watching the play, and the game was so cluttered. There really wasn't a lot of I don't know. I'll bet you there were about you can probably count the outnumbered situations in your hand in that series. And so all I can remember is the guys on the ice celebrating. And when they went up, our bench went up. So it's not as though it was like a 2-on-1, a slapper, and it's like, hey, here's the anticipation of it, because it all came off a broken play. I think it was a turnover down lower. The puck came out of the corner as normal and got just kind of dumped to the net, and it was banged in about the second or third whack. So I think we celebrate. I remember I celebrated when the guys on the ice, when they celebrated.
Yeah. And your room, I've seen images of the room. You've won the cup. You're in your own world. At what point did you start to hear Buffalo's side of it? I mean, you've won the cup, and there's always another side, but this was you're in the broadcast business now, so you know how significant the Sabres' take on that goal was. How did it affect you, or did it affect you at all as far as, your post celebrations of what you'd accomplished?
Yeah. Personally, with me, I had no idea. And now other guys may have. I had no idea. I had a lot of family there, a lot of relatives in the Niagara Falls area for me, and a lot of family coming in from the Toronto area. I mean, it was very close. So I was, by the time we got everybody in, the photos were going on. The first time that I realized that there was any issue whatsoever, and this is from being on the ice, and I'm, people saying, "Oh, Lindy Ruff came out and he was yelling, the celebration going on, and the cup's being, he's yelling," and I'm like, I don't remember seeing him. And people, "Oh, you must." I'm like, I don't. I believe it was an interview I was doing. I think it was with TSN's Cord Miller at the time, but it was an interview, and I was asked my thoughts on the goal and the controversy of the goal, and I was like, "What controversy?" I had no idea. I get, you couldn't see on the ice. You couldn't see it if he was in the crease, whether it was his toe, his foot, or you couldn't see it all. And then throughout the celebration, everything else, it was, the doors open at one end, the media and everybody were on, and we were all hugging each other, and even with the post celebration when the cup was presented, we were all still looking for family. My brothers ended up down on the bench, so until we got back in, and so I'm probably going on well after an hour. By the time we got back in the locker room, I was oblivious to the whole thing just because of the kind of the euphoria of the moment.
Yeah.
But until I was asked the question in an interview, that's when I first realized that there was some issue going on. And I think Brian Lewis was the referee in chief. And I remember walking by him, and he was being interviewed at the time. And I wasn't listening to him. I could care less what he had to say, because I won the cup. I didn't even know what the situation was. And I can remember seeing him there, and then being asked afterwards in another interview about my thoughts of it. And I was like, and that later it kind of all put two and two together with, well, that's why they were. So I was like, why are they interviewing Brian Lewis? He didn't even ref the game. I'm pretty sure it was Brian Lewis.
Yeah.
And anyhow, so that's where I picked it up. And again, I might have been oblivious. Other guys may have known about it right away, but
well, and that's
honestly,
why
that was the last thing I was thinking of, because I'm sitting there and the cup's right beside me in the room. I'm with the cup on the ice, and we're taking all these pictures, and I had no idea.
Well, and that's my only reason for asking, is that I'm thinking, again, it's part of this for people watching in Buffalo is to put themselves in the other team's boots for a minute. And yeah, you've just, from where you are on the bench, the puck's in the net, your teammates are throwing their sticks in the air, and you're celebrating. You've won the Stanley Cup. You're living the dream. That's your side of the story. And then obviously the Sabres side of the story was very much in contrast to that, but it doesn't and didn't change the outcome of the moment. So it's certainly not to point fingers, but it is just to find out what people were either aware of or not aware of. I would, if it were me too, I'd probably be, if I'm on the other side, I had no idea. I mean, we just won the cup. I don't know. It's 3 overtimes or game 6. We're on the road. We can't wait to get home. All those things going through your mind. Listen, Dave.
Yeah, no, Dan. You know what? I've never watched the series. I've never watched that game. I've seen celebrations. I've seen the goal scored.
Yeah.
But knowing, obviously knowing what's the rules, it was the dumbest rule ever at the time. And looking back, I can remember everybody, many goals throughout the course of the year. But there's no question over the course of the year that if I was on the other side, I would have done the exact same thing as the Sabres and questioned why that goal was allowed at that time, because there's X, Y, and Z goals that weren't allowed in a similar situation, and this one was. And but again, I totally understand where everybody was on the discussions, but I had. People say I'm oblivious to a lot of things, but I had no idea in my level of oblivion at that time in 1999.
Well, you and I share that in common then, because Razor tells me I'm oblivious to everything about hockey as well. So there you, and you play the game, and you're a Stanley Cup winner. Dave, I can't thank you enough for this. First of all, it's a pleasure just to talk to you again. It's been quite a while since you and I have a chance to talk to face, and I know you know Duffer really well, and if Brian
I was going to say, we never even brought up Duffer from the NHL Network, the guy who got me to the next level, the host of the NHL Network.
Well,
and the biggest Buffalo Sabres fan around. I kept working with him. He'd be like, all you want to do is put the Sabres game on. I'm like, buddy, what are you putting the Sabres game on for? Like, we got the Avs, we got the Red Wings. Look at all these like players. You got the Sabres team on. He was like, oh no, we got to watch the Sabres. And then I finally realized how big a Sabres fan he was. Now he is doing his dream job.
Yes, he is. And well, now we've made his dream come true because you've talked about him on this segment. So there we go.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Great talking to you. Make sure you look after yourself and your family.
Yes, thanks, Dan. Stay safe.